Hello, this is Hazel Jane and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have a look at the Spellcasting Oracle cards, which are just out in July 2020 from Hay House. And I have just spontaneously purchased, I was buying another deck that's been on my wish list for a long time. And this was at a very reduced price at I think about £11.50. So I just thought I'd give it a go. And I'm trying to shift on my channel towards doing more reviews rather than just walkthroughs of decks. This is still a pretty new channel. I'm trying to figure out what works best for me, and I think I want to try to focus on reviews. So I will try to show most of the cards today. This is a pretty new deck, but I want to give you a bit of a feel for what it actually does as well. So this is from Hay House. It comes in a really nice tactile box. Like there's a nice finish on it, and then there's kind of like a slight gild into the lettering. So most Hay House packages are coming in a nice box like this, and because they're all the same size, they stack really nicely on shelves and so on. So no problems at all with the packaging. The book also has a nice soft matte cover, and the cards themselves also have a kind of a matte finish. There's a very slight sheen off them, as you can see when the light hits, but certainly they would photograph well, I think. Yeah, they are nice cardstock. I would say they are maybe a little bit thin. Perfectly good for shuffling and dealing out cards, but because of the nature of this deck, I think you might want to take a card and set it up and display it on an altar, or if you were using it for a focus for spellcasting, you might want to actually use and display the cards. And in that context, I think they are maybe just a little bit flimsy, a little bit thin. But as a deck to shuffle, I mean, I really like a deck that you can thumb through like that, and they have that lovely sound that you get with matte finish, nice smooth matte finish on the cards. So the cards are lovely as an actual physical package. The back of the back design of the cards I do really like. I really like the colors. Obviously they're not reversible, but that's not a factor with this deck. I think the backs are really pretty. So the idea behind this deck is created by Flavia Kate Peters and Barbara Meiklejohn-Free, and the artwork is by Lisbeth Cheever-Gessman. Now, I have come across the artist before on the Divine Feminine Oracle deck, but the creators I wasn't familiar with before. So the idea is that this deck is to help you cast spells. I'll show you how that works in a minute. But just to sort of give you a little bit of where I'm coming from, while I've been reading tarot for a long time, I would say I'm very much a baby witch in the spellcasting department. I have read a few books about spellcraft and correspondences and so on, but I've not, that's not something that's a regular daily part of my life. I do follow a lot of the tarot tubers that I enjoy, are also witches and talk a lot about that side of their life and their practice and how they go about things. So I've learned a bit from that, from reading a few books that those people have recommended and so on. But I'm by no means an expert in the spell casting side of things. The creators then, I thought it was interesting to have a look at what witchcraft kind of background the creators are coming from. So Flavia Kate Peters is described here as a hereditary witch and high priestess of Arnemetia and the Morrigan. And she's described as an expert in elemental and ancient magic. And then Barbara Meiklejohn-Free is a high priestess of Isis and the Cailleach, and is described as a hereditary, eclectic and solitary witch. So neither of them seem to subscribe to a particular, like Wicca or anything, like a particular religion or approach to witchcraft. But I thought it was interesting to have a look at that, considering the way spellcrafting is presented within the book. And in this particular deck, I think the book is quite important to have a look at as to how it works. I'm going to try to keep this video under 15 minutes because I think my videos have been a little bit long. So as you can see, it talks you through what is spellcraft and what is a spell. And then there's a list of do's and don'ts for approaching spellcraft. It is quite prescriptive, I suppose it is as a how-to kind of introduction to spellcrafting. I guess it kind of has to be specific, quite prescriptive in what it's explaining for you to do. But it does seem to ascribe to a particular set of beliefs around magic and spellcraft. Like, for example, there, the page that I'm holding open, the threefold law, that anything that you give out will come back to you 3 times 3 times 3. And our magical intention must always be with harm to none. So that is a particular very specific belief around witchcraft. So the what's described here is in the context of these sort of beliefs. So it does go through some correspondences that are useful for spellcrafting, like what the different phases of the moon might be used for, the different full moons of the year, then different weekdays and what they might correspond to. So a lot of that is about deciding when to conduct a spell. So that, I guess, is quite useful. And then there's some limited information on the correspondences of the different elements and directions and so on. And then there's a how to craft a spell. And again, it's very prescriptive and specific. So for example, it invites you to on the day before that you're going to do your spell, that you take some time to meditate, that you create a sacred space, that you create a circle, that you cast a circle is prescribed within this. And then how the cards come into it all is that you are supposed to then choose a card and cast the spell described within the card. And then it describes about how to seal your spell at the end. So that's all, that's all fine. That's a perfectly good introduction to how to craft a spell. But it is very prescriptive, and I think it could be for people who are very experienced with spellcraft and with witchcraft. They might find it maybe does or doesn't, depending on what their background, your own background is. It might not jive with how you like to do things. Like, I know, listening to other people talk about their spellcraft, some people don't cast a circle, or some people just do spells as and when they need to, rather than doing them on a particular occasion, and so on. And if you're brand new to spellcrafting, you might find all of this really helpful to give you some structure, or you might find it kind of intimidating, the amount of specific detail that's requested. So the idea is, if you were to pull a card, you then cast the spell. So let's just have a look at this one then, for love, that is here on the top. So for each card then, if you were to draw the card, I guess you could do it in 2 ways. Intentionally, you could say, I want to work on love, so you could intentionally pull that card, or you can pull a card at random to see what kind of spell you need at the moment for whatever problem you're trying to address. So here you have a little bit of magical guidance, which is something like an oracle, meaning, the love you seek is waiting to be made manifest, and so on. So if you were just using it as an oracle deck, that meaning is could be quite useful. And then there's the magical meaning here, work with rose quartz, accept and believe in who you are, it is safe to give and receive love. Those again are meanings that could work perfectly well as an oracle deck. But then there's a spell here too given for it. So it says to open your heart chakra, hold a piece of rose quartz and light a pink candle on a Friday at dusk when the moon is full, face the direction of south and say. And then you have a rhyming spell. So flowers of pink, crystal of rose, bring to me a new romance, so I will not close, and so on and so on. I think someone who's fairly new to this type of thing, some of the correspondences that are given here are quite useful. So rose quartz or pink candle, that those would be useful things to use if you were trying to invoke love. But the prescriptiveness of the when to do it, I think, is almost impossible. On a Friday at dusk when the moon is full, how many Fridays of full moons will fall in a given year? The next entry, manifestation. Take a handful of seeds on a Thursday at sunrise during a full moon. They're very, very specific as to when. At noon on a Monday during the first quarter moon, face south and say, I understand what they're trying to do in terms of tying together the information they've given at the beginning of the book as to when might be a good time to reinforce your spell intention. But by laying it all on, like it must be on this day, at this time, at this phase of the moon, I think that could be restrictive in terms of being able to actually find an opportunity. If you were using this as exactly how to do it, exactly like this guide, it might be hard to find a chance to actually do it. So, for me, that might not be terribly useful personally. The chanting of the poems that are given for the spells, I don't really think that would be for me either. But some people might find it really helpful. But I think the oracle meanings are useful, and the correspondences that are given for spellcraft I would probably find useful in terms of what tools they suggest. So I'll show you some of the art. Some of the images that are given correspond with what's described in the spell. Like here, the love one, you see the person holding the rose quartz, and that corresponds with what's described. But the manifestation image, which again is a fantastic image, but it's more like the magician in the tarot in terms of the posture, and the spell that was described there was about scattering seeds, which is not what's depicted in the image. So they don't always exactly match up with what you see in the book. By and large, they do depict people, although not all of them. And as you can see, they're very pretty cards. So there's some are not depicting people. They're very pretty cards, very colourful. They have a kind of a really nice magical effects to them, the way the lights depicted and so on. So I think they're very pretty to look at, and I like the colour palette. It is a bit of a young, body beautiful kind of a deck. There are a few older faces, but mostly the people depicted are very young and slim and pretty. It's also quite not a hugely diverse deck, so there are a couple of cards that depict people of colour, or as they say in the UK, BME, black and minority ethnic people, but they're very few. Most of the people depicted are white. I think I counted 4 cards that unambiguously present a person of colour, but the rest of the people depicted in a 48 card deck are white. So that diversity is a little bit disappointing, I guess. The art style is very pretty. I do prefer a bit more diversity in the art in the deck than what we're getting here. So you do have a nice range, as you can see, of keywords and topics, in terms of an oracle deck. There is a bit of light and shade. I think you would be able to find, if you wanted to craft a spell, there is a really good range of topics that you might want to craft a spell on. And if you wanted to use it as an oracle deck for like what kind of issue needs to be addressed in this situation, or maybe as a supporting card for a reading with another deck, what do you need to work on here? I think it might be useful in that regard. So as I say, it's a reasonably good jumping off point, I think, if you're new to spellcrafting, to kind of find out a little bit about what is involved in spellcraft. And And as I say, new people who are relatively new to spellcraft like myself might find some of the suggested tools and correspondences useful, but the way the actual spellcraft or spellcasting being specific to particular days and times might be a little off-putting. And I'd be really interested to know from more from experienced witches who are familiar with spellcrafting, what you think a deck like this, how useful you think a deck like this might be, because I can imagine that it might be somewhat frustrating or a bit too prescriptive if you've already established your own practice. But yes, so that's the Spellcasting Oracle cards by Flavia Kate Peters and Barbara Meiklejohn-Free, with artwork by Lisbeth Cheever-Gessman, and that's available from Hay House. So I hope you've enjoyed this quick review of the deck, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about it as well if you've worked with it. Bye.